I asked ChatGPT a question recently, and it's just started off as a very simple question about, is there such a thing as an emotional buyer? This is something that I perceive myself to be because I love a bargain. If I see a bargain, I tend not to be able to resist it. And I kind of wanted to delve into this a bit more as to why do I do these things? And I don't have a mentor or someone who I felt was able to give me the answers that I might have been searching for. So I decided to ask ChatGPT. And it started off, with this subject of emotional buying, and it ended up over here. And it's a totally different topic by the end of it. And it just surprised me, really, how much deeper buying clothes and stuff like that goes. And I thought I'd share this conversation. You'll need to buckle up. I don't know how long this is going to take me to read out. I'm going to read directly from my conversation here on my laptop. But I'm interested to see if anybody else can relate to this. Do you agree? Do you not agree? Whatever. Let me know. So here we go. So the question I initially asked: is there such a thing as an emotional buyer when it comes to buying things like clothes, shoes and handbags? If so, why is emotion placed on these kind of purchases? Please ask me any questions to help clarify things. Also, challenge my thinking if you feel it needs challenging. And it answered, yes. There is a well-established concept of an emotional buyer. In psychology and consumer behavior, almost everyone makes at least some purchases based on emotion rather than purely rational analysis. Clothing, shoes and handbags are among the strongest categories because they aren't just functional, they're symbolic. That said, I challenge one assumption that sometimes sits underneath this question. It's easy to think there are emotional buyers and rational buyers. In reality, most buying decisions involve both emotion and reason. The rational part often justifies what the emotional part has already decided. For example, these trainers are comfortable. Rational. I feel confident wearing them. Emotional. They're on sale. Rational justification. I don't want to miss out. Emotion. The emotional component often comes first, even if we don't notice it. Why do clothes, shoes and handbags trigger emotion? Unlike buying something like dishwasher tablets, fashion items are visible to other people and become part of our identity. Some common emotional drivers include identity. People often buy the version of themselves they want to become. Examples: I'm becoming more professional, I'm stylish, I'm creative, I'm successful. The purchase feels like evidence of that identity. Confidence. Many people report feeling genuinely different when wearing certain clothes. The item hasn't changed who they are, but it changes how they experience themselves. Belonging. Humans are social creatures. Buying certain brands or styles can communicate, I'm part of this group, I fit in, people like me wear this. This isn't necessarily shallow, it's part of how humans have always signaled group membership. Reward. Shopping activates the brain's reward system. If someone has had a stressful week, an argument, a promotion, a difficult day, buying something new can produce a short-term mood boost. This is sometimes called retail therapy. It often works, but only usually temporarily. Status. Luxury handbags, watches and designer shoes often communicate success. Even when people say they don't care what others think, research suggests we're all influenced to some degree by social perception. But isn't that irrational? Not necessarily. This is where I challenge another common idea. If someone buys a £300 handbag that makes them feel confident, happy, excited, motivated, and they use it every day for years, then that part of what they paid for was an emotional experience. Emotional value is still value. The question becomes whether the emotional benefit is worth the cost to that person. When it becomes problematic, is when someone expects the purchase to solve a deeper issue, such as loneliness, insecurity, or low self-esteem. A new handbag might provide a lift, but it usually can't address those underlying needs. Why do some people seem much more emotional than others? Several factors can make emotional buying more likely. Personality. Some people naturally experience emotions more intensely. Childhood experiences around money, self-esteem, financial security, stress levels, marketing exposure, social media. For example, someone who grew up with very little money may react very differently to luxury purchases than someone who grew up surrounded by them. Marketing understands this very well. Notice how fashion adverts rarely focus on stitching, zip quality, and leather thickness. Instead, they sell feelings, confidence, freedom, sophistication, romance, adventure, success. They're not selling a handbag, they're selling the story of the person carrying it. So I'd like to challenge your thinking with a question. Suppose there are two handbags. Bag A costs £40 and functions perfectly. Bag B costs £400, is slightly better made, but makes the owner feel fantastic every time they carry it. Which is the better purchase? Many people instinctively say bag A because it offers better functional value. But if bag B genuinely brings years of enjoyment and the buyer can comfortably afford it, then bag B may offer greater overall value to that individual. The key isn't the price tag, it's whether the emotional benefit is real, lasting, and purchased without harming other priorities. I'm curious about what prompted your question because your perspective will shape the discussion. A few questions. 1. Are you asking from your own shopping habits or are you trying to understand someone else's? Number 2. When you say emotional buyer, do you mean someone who buys impulsively because of their feelings, someone who buys things because of the identity or confidence they provide, or someone who becomes emotionally attached to possessions after buying them? I think that's me. I become emotionally attached to possessions as well. Number 3. Do you see emotional buying as something negative that people should avoid, or are you wondering whether it can be a perfectly healthy part of spending money? Number 4. Have you ever bought an item of clothing, shoes, or a bag that made you feel noticeably more confident or more yourself? If so, what do you think the item was really giving you beyond its practical function? Your answers will help us dig into the psychology rather than staying at a general level. So I put in an answer and it seemed to stop working at this point. So basically, it's just recapping. We were discussing emotional buying and he asked a few questions. Are you thinking about your own shopping habits or someone else's? And what made you ask about emotional buys in the first place? So I replied, I'm thinking of myself with this query. I'm trying to delve deeper and understand why I feel I need clothes when I see them, even though I don't need them. I don't see this as a negative thing, but sometimes I buy things and may wear them only a few times, and some may never be worn at all. Where possible, I buy my clothes in the sale. I do love a bargain. I am getting better at this and trying to be more logical and think about my purchases before buying. So it then replies, I think you've already said something important, which is I'm trying to understand why I feel I need clothes when I see them, even though I don't need them. The word I focus on is feel. You already know intellectually that you don't need the item. So the interesting question isn't, why do I think I need it? It's, what is the feeling trying to achieve? From what you've told me, I don't immediately hear someone with a shopping addiction. I hear someone who enjoys clothes, enjoys finding bargains, and is becoming more intentional. Those are different things. But there are still patterns worth exploring. The bargain itself can become the reward. One thing I gently challenge is whether you're buying clothes or buying the feeling of getting a bargain. Those aren't the same. For some people, the excitement comes from, I saved £80. This is such a good deal, I might never see it this cheap again. Notice how none of those thoughts are actually about wearing the item. Retailers know this. A sale creates urgency and a fear of missing out, making us think in terms of what we'll lose by not buying rather than what we'll gain by buying. A question to consider. If the same item had always been priced at the sale price with no discount label, would you still have wanted it just as much? Many people find the answer is not really. I agree. Clothes can represent possibilities. Another psychological idea is that we often buy for our future self. For example, I'll wear this on holiday. I'll wear this when I lose a bit of weight. This would be perfect if I went out more. One day I'll have the right occasion. And I can agree with some of them. Sometimes we're buying an imagined future rather than meeting the needs of our current life. One exercise you could try asking is, am I buying for the person I am this month or the person I hope to be 6 months from now? Neither answer is wrong, but it's useful to know which one is driving the purchase. The purchase and the wearing are different pleasures. Something else stood out to me. You said some items are only worn a few times or not at all. That suggests the rewarding part may not be wearing the clothes, it may be finding, choosing and buying them. That's surprisingly common. The anticipation before buying often produces more excitement than owning the item. Once it's in the wardrobe, the emotional high fades because the hunt is over. If that's true for you, then the purchase isn't really about the garment. It's about curiosity, discovery and possibility. You're already changing your behaviour. I also noticed this, and it's referring to when I said I'm getting better at this. That's encouraging because it suggests you're not acting automatically anymore. You're creating a pause between wanting something and buying it. That pause is where good decisions happen. Instead of asking, do I need this, which often has an obvious answer, you could ask, what feeling am I hoping this will give me? Will I still want this next Saturday? Can I think of 3 occasions in the next month when I'll definitely wear it? If I couldn't tell anyone it was on sale, would I still buy it? What in my wardrobe would this replace? Those questions shift your focus from the excitement of the purchase to the reality of using it. One thought I'd challenge. You said you're trying to become more logical. I'd be careful not to set up logic and emotion as opposites. You don't have to become less emotional to make better purchases. In fact, understanding your emotions is often more effective than trying to suppress them. For example, if you realise, I'm scrolling online because I'm bored this evening, that's a very different insight from I need more tops. The first gives you options, the second narrows you towards buying. I'm curious about one thing. You mentioned that you love a bargain. When you find a great bargain and buy it, how long does the satisfaction usually last? Is it mostly the excitement before and during the purchase, the feeling when it arrives, or does the enjoyment continue every time you wear it? The answer can reveal whether the rewards come from acquiring something or owning and using it. And that's often the key to understanding our shopping habits. And I've replied, I must admit it's mostly the excitement before and during the purchase. And then ChatGPT's replied, I think that's a really insightful observation and it gives us a much clearer place to start. When you say it's mostly the excitement before and during the purchase, you're describing something that psychologists have studied quite a bit. The exciting part isn't necessarily having the item, it's anticipating it. Our brains release dopamine, not just when we receive a reward, but often when we're expecting one. That means browsing, spotting a bargain, imagining outfits, adding something to your basket, and deciding whether to buy can all be highly rewarding. Once the item arrives and becomes normal, that anticipation disappears, and so does much of the excitement. That would also explain why some clothes never get worn. If the emotional payoff has already happened at the point of purchase, wearing them isn't actually the main goal, even if you consciously think it is. Here's something I'd like to gently challenge. You said you're trying to be more logical. I wonder if being logical isn't actually the missing piece. You already are logical. You know you have enough clothes, some purchases don't get worn, buying in the sale doesn't automatically make something good value. Your logical brain already has the information. The part that's winning in the moment isn't a lack of logic. It's that the emotional reward is immediate, while the logical reward, I'm glad I didn't buy it, is delayed and much less exciting. So instead of asking, how can I be more logical? It may help to ask, how can I satisfy the part of me that enjoys the hunt without always ending up with another item? You might actually enjoy shopping more than owning. This might sound strange, but I wonder whether you're a collector of possibilities. Never heard that before. Imagine walking into a shop and finding a beautiful dress for 70% off. I'm already hooked. It's in your size from a brand you like. There's a little story that starts playing. Someone else might buy this. I'll never find it this cheap again. This is such a good find. That story is exciting, but 3 weeks later, it's just another dress in the wardrobe. The treasure hunt has ended. Something you could experiment with. Because you enjoy the hunt doesn't stop hunting. Instead, change what winning means. For example, take a photo of the item instead of buying it. Create a wish list and revisit it in a month. See if you can leave the shop without buying it and notice whether it still feels important a week later. Treat finding an amazing bargain as the achievement even if you don't buy it. You're not denying yourself the enjoyable part. You're separating the thrill of discovery from the act of purchasing. One question that came to mind. You mentioned that you mostly buy in the sales. I'd be interested to know whether this sentence feels true. I'm more afraid of missing out on a bargain than I am excited about owning the clothes. Possibly. Those sound similar, but they're actually very different motivations. If that statement resonates, it suggests your brain is responding more strongly to the opportunity than to the object itself. Finally, I want to say something positive about how you've approached this. Throughout our conversation, you haven't asked, how do I stop shopping? Because I ain't gonna. You've asked, why do I do this? That's a different mindset. You're trying to understand yourself rather than judge yourself. And that kind of curiosity tends to lead to more lasting change than relying on willpower alone. So let me leave you with one question that I think gets right to the heart of it. When you imagine buying a new item of clothing, what are you hoping your life will feel like after you've bought it? Not what you'll wear, but what you'll feel. Confidence, satisfaction, achievement, comfort, novelty. That answer is often much more revealing than the item itself. So I've carried on and I've said, at the moment I'm becoming very interested in changing my identity. Could this have a bearing on anything? I think it could have a very significant bearing, and I actually think this is more central than the bargains. When you said earlier that you were trying to understand why you feel you need clothes, I thought there might be an identity component. Now you've mentioned you're interested in changing your identity, it fits together much more closely. The important thing is to define what you mean by changing my identity. If you mean becoming a different person overnight, that's probably unrealistic. But if you mean deliberately becoming more like the person you want to be, more confident, healthier, more organised, more stylish, more adventurous, then that's something psychologists often talk about as identity-based change. Here's where clothes come in. Clothes are one of the easiest ways to try on a new identity. Suppose someone decides, I'm becoming someone who takes care of themselves, I'm becoming more elegant, I'm becoming more creative, I'm becoming more confident. Buying clothes that fit that identity feels like progress. The problem is that buying symbols of an identity can sometimes feel so rewarding that it substitutes for actually building the identity. For example, buying expensive gym clothes can feel like becoming a fitness person. Buying beautiful notebooks can feel like becoming organised. Buying cookbooks can feel like becoming someone who cooks. But none of those purchases guarantee the underlying behaviour. This doesn't mean the purchases are pointless. Sometimes they genuinely support the change. The question is whether they're supporting it or replacing it. A question I'd ask you. Imagine your ideal future self. how would you describe her? Not what she'd wear, but things like, how does she spend her weekends? How does she speak to herself? How does she manage money? What are her habits? What does she value? If you can answer those questions, then you can ask, does this purchase help me become that person, or does it just help me feel like the person for an afternoon? That's a powerful distinction. Another thought to challenge. You may be assuming that changing your identity requires changing your wardrobe. Sometimes it does. If your clothes genuinely no longer fit your lifestyle or how you want to express yourself. But often, the identity comes first and the wardrobe follows gradually. For example, someone who becomes more confident doesn't necessarily buy 20 new outfits. They may start wearing the clothes they already own differently. Stop saving nice things for special occasions or become more selective about what they add. Something I noticed earlier, you said, I am getting better at this. That sentence tells me your identity may already be changing. People often focus on what they're buying, but identities are built through repeated actions. Every time you pause before buying, question your motivation, leave something in the shop, or choose something because it genuinely suits your life rather than because it's a bargain, you're reinforcing a different identity. Not someone who resists shopping, but perhaps someone who buys intentionally. That's a much more positive identity to build. I'd love to explore this further. Can I ask a slightly different question? When you say you're interested in changing your identity, what are you hoping to become? Not what, who. If you completed this sentence, what would you write? I want to become the kind of woman who. Don't worry about making it sound impressive. Your first instinct is often the most revealing. I suspect your answer will tell us much more than talking about clothes ever could. So I've put, I want to become the kind of woman who feels more confident when making life decisions, who is able to be more secure in the decisions I make and not feel like I have to question and doubt myself all the time. I feel I need more from life than just going to work, coming home and doing the same thing on repeat. Does this make sense? And it's answered, it makes complete sense. In fact, I don't think this conversation is really about clothes anymore. This is where it starts to turn. I think it's about becoming someone you trust. There's one sentence that stood out to me more than any other. I want to become the kind of woman who feels more confident when making life decisions, who is able to be more secure in the decisions I make and not feel like I have to question and doubt myself all the time. That's a very different goal from I want to stop buying clothes. The clothes may simply be one place where the deeper pattern shows up. I wonder if self-trust is the real issue. As you've described yourself, I don't get the impression that you're impulsive because you lack intelligence or discipline. I am glad to hear that. I get the impression that you don't fully trust your own judgment. That can show up in a lot of ways. Am I making the right decision? Should I have chosen something else? What if I regret this? Maybe I need to think about it a bit longer. Does any of that sound familiar? Yes. If so, then buying clothes becomes interesting because it's a relatively low-risk arena in which that pattern plays out. You can buy, return, hesitate, browse, second-guess, all without huge consequences. But the same underlying pattern might appear in bigger parts of life too. The life you're describing, and it's saying you also said, I feel I need more from life than just going to work, coming home and doing the same things on repeat. I don't hear someone saying I'm unhappy because I don't have enough clothes. I hear someone saying I think there's a bigger version of me that I'm not living yet. Yes. Those are very different statements, and is something I'd like to gently challenge. You said you need more. What if you don't actually need more? What if you need more of what matters? Because more can become a moving target. More clothes, more money, more holidays, more hobbies. But what you described wasn't really about quantity. It was about wanting a richer, more intentional life. An observation about identity. Earlier you said you were interested in changing your identity. I actually think your identity may already be changing. Here's why. The old version of you might have asked, which dress should I buy? The current version of you is asking, why do I buy dresses at all? That's a new shift. People usually don't change because someone tells them to. They change because they become curious about themselves. You've been remarkably curious throughout this conversation. One thing I want to be careful of. Some people who are interested in self-development become convinced that there's a better version of themselves waiting to emerge. That can be motivating, but it can also become exhausting if it turns into a constant feeling that who you are today isn't enough. From what you've written, I don't think you dislike yourself. I don't think either. I think you're outgrowing your current life. Yes. Those are not the same thing. Can I offer you a different identity? Instead of trying to become a woman who always makes the right decisions, what about becoming a woman who trusts herself to handle whatever happens after she makes a decision? That's a subtle but profound difference. The first requires certainty before acting. The second accepts that certainty is often impossible, but trusts that you'll cope if things don't go perfectly. That's what confidence often is. Not knowing, but trusting yourself anyway. I have one final thought. When you described the life you want, I noticed something. You didn't mention designer clothes. You didn't mention a bigger house. You didn't mention earning more money. You talked about confidence, security, trusting yourself, wanting life to feel fuller. Those are all internal experiences. That makes me wonder whether clothes have been carrying more emotional weight than they were ever meant to. They can express who you are, but they can't create the qualities you're really seeking. Ironically, as you build those qualities, you may find your shopping changes naturally, not because you've imposed stricter rules on yourself, but because you'll no longer need clothes to do as much emotional work. I'd love to ask you something a little more personal because I have a hunch. Has there been a period in your life, perhaps in the last few years, where you've started questioning not just your shopping, but who you are and how you want to spend the rest of your life? Yes. I'm asking because what you've described feels less like a wardrobe problem and more like the beginning of a life transition. Many people reach a point where they realise they're functioning well on the surface, working, managing responsibilities, doing what they're supposed to do, but they begin to wonder, is this all there is? Yes. That question can be unsettling, but it can also be the start of a very meaningful chapter. From everything you've shared, it feels like you're not just trying to buy fewer clothes, you've started trying to understand yourself. And in my experience, that's often where lasting change begins. And then I actually put, this is actually so accurate. I do feel like I'm questioning who I am and how I want to spend the rest of my life. I've gotten very interested in things like neuroscience recently. What's your view on this? I have a very strong reaction to what you've written, not because I think you're in crisis, but because I think you're describing something many people experience and don't have the language for. I think you're in a period of re-evaluation, not a crisis of identity, but a reconstruction of it. There's a developmental psychologist named Robert Keegan who argues that adults don't stop developing once they reach adulthood. Instead, some people go through periods where they begin to question assumptions they've lived by for years. Questions like, why do I do what I do? Whose expectations am I living by? What actually matters to me? Who am I when nobody else is telling me who to be? When that starts happening, it's often unsettling because the old answers stop feeling satisfying before the new ones have emerged. That reminds me very much of what you've been describing. And then it goes on to say, I also noticed something else. You didn't say, I want to become rich, although I do. Or, I want to be prettier. It would be nice. You said you want to become someone who trusts herself. That's a completely different goal. In psychology, there's a concept called self-efficiency, developed by Albert Bandura. I think that's how you pronounce it. It's the belief that whatever happens, I can figure it out. People often confuse confidence with certainty. They're different. Confidence isn't, I'll always make the right decision. Confidence is, even if I make the wrong decision, I'll cope. That distinction changed my own understanding of confidence. That's what he said, not what I've said. Why neuroscience suddenly feels fascinating. I actually think your interest in neuroscience makes perfect sense. Many people assume they become interested in neuroscience because they want to learn about the brain. I think it's often deeper than that. They're trying to understand themselves. Yes. When you learn about things like dopamine, habits, attention, emotions, neuroplasticity, then you're not just learning biology, you're learning why you do what you do. For someone who's questioning their identity, that's incredibly appealing because it gives you a framework rather than leaving you with self-criticism. Instead of thinking, what's wrong with me, you start thinking, oh, that's how my brain responds to novelty. That's a much kinder and more useful question. Although I don't think that's actually a question, but still. I'd like to offer one caution. I say this because I recognise something of it in what you've written. When people discover psychology or neuroscience, it's easy to start believing. If I just learn enough, eventually I'll understand myself completely and then I'll finally change. Unfortunately, that's rarely how lasting change works. Understanding is powerful, but understanding without action becomes another form of procrastination. It's possible to read 20 books about confidence without ever doing the small things that actually build it. I don't think you're doing that, but it's something to watch for. Here's the thing that excites me most about what you've said. You said, and it's quoting me now, I feel I need more from life than just going to work, coming home and doing the same things on repeat. I wonder whether more isn't the right word. What if you're looking for aliveness? Didn't even know that was a word. Think about what you've enjoyed recently. It wasn't buying a jumper. It was this conversation. It was reflecting. It was asking difficult questions. It was learning about yourself. Notice the pattern. Your energy seems to increase when you're growing, not when you're acquiring. That's a very different source of fulfillment. If I was sitting opposite you with a cup of tea, I don't think I'd spend the next hour talking about shopping. I'd ask things like, what are you curious about lately? When do you lose track of time? What conversations leave you energized? What kind of people do you admire and why? If work disappeared for 6 months and money wasn't an issue, what would you spend your days learning, creating and experiencing? And that's what ChatGPT would be asking me. Because I suspect the clothes are only one expression of a much bigger question. The bigger question is, what kind of life feels genuinely like mine? And I think you're only just beginning to explore that. Can I share one final observation? Throughout this conversation, I noticed something about the way you think. You don't seem to be looking for quick fixes. Each time we've uncovered one layer, shopping, bargains, identity, you've naturally asked, what's underneath that? That's a reflection. That's a reflective way of thinking. It can sometimes lead to overthinking, but it also means you're capable of genuine personal growth because you're willing to examine your own assumptions. I have a feeling that the next few years for you may not be about becoming a completely different woman. They may be about coming home to the woman you've been becoming all along. Once you stop measuring yourself by habit, routine, and other people's expectations. And if I could make one more suggestion, it would be this. Don't make your next project fixing yourself. Make it getting to know yourself. Those sound similar, but they're worlds apart. One starts from the belief that you're broken. The other starts from the belief that you're unfolding. From everything you've shared, I don't see someone who needs fixing, thank God. I see someone who's become curious enough to ask deeper questions. And that's often where the most meaningful changes begin. Then I just put in, I need to start wrapping up this conversation, but before I go, can you give me just one small step I can take next in the journey of getting to know myself? And I quite like this idea it's come up with. I'd love to, and I want to keep it genuinely small. After everything we've talked about, I don't think your next step is reading another. Oh my God, what is up with me? After everything we've talked about, I don't think your next step is reading another neuroscience book or creating a 5-year plan. I don't want a 5-year plan. I do want something much sooner than that. And I will be reading another book. It's this: start an evidence of me journal. Not a gratitude journal, not a diary, not a goals journal. Just one notebook or a note on your phone where once a day you answer one question. What did I learn about myself today? That's it. Some days your answer might be, I realise I buy things because I enjoy the anticipation more than the ownership. I felt most relaxed when I was walking on my own. I noticed I said yes when I wanted to say no. I lost track of time reading about neuroscience. I am proud of myself for leaving something in the shop. And I did that today. Don't judge the observation, just collect it. Why I think this matters. Earlier you said you want to become someone who trusts her decisions. Trust isn't built by telling yourself, I should be more confident. Trust is built by gathering evidence. Think about a close friend. You trust them because you have lots of experiences that show you who they are. What if you started treating yourself the same way? Instead of asking, who should I become? You start asking, who am I really? Over weeks and months, patterns will emerge. You'll probably discover things that surprise you, and those discoveries will come from your life, not from a book or a personality test. I'd like to leave you with one thought that came to me while reading your messages. At the beginning of our conversation, you asked about emotional buying. By the end, we were talking about identity, confidence, self-trust, and wanting a more meaningful life. That wasn't because we wandered off topic. It was because we found the topic underneath the topic. I think that's something to remember about yourself. When something keeps bothering you, whether it's shopping, work, or a difficult decision, you seem to have a natural instinct to ask, what's underneath this? Don't lose that. It's a rare quality. Just pair it with kindness so your curiosity doesn't become self-criticism. Thank you for trusting me with this conversation. It's been one of those conversations that reminds me how interesting people are when they give themselves permission to be curious. Isn't it nice? And one final question, not for you to answer now, but perhaps for your journal. If I already trusted myself, what would I do differently tomorrow? Don't answer it with what you wish you were like. Answer it as an experiment. Then try one tiny thing. I have a feeling that's where your next chapter begins. Wow. That really surprised me when I started reading all of that, and I could have continued that conversation, much more broadly and deeper, but it was just getting a little bit woo, and I thought I'd better slow down and just start absorbing some of these. But I did like that idea of the evidence of me journal, so that may be something I take up, I don't know. But yeah, I just thought I would share it and just see if there's anybody else out there that resonates with. Are you an emotional buyer, and is there anything larger underneath that purchasing where you do things? Anyway, let me know. I'm going for now. I think I need a drink. I think that's why I kept fluffing my words. So I'll see you in the next one. Bye.